Hello everybody, today I'm going to have a look at wood turning on a wood lathe like the one behind me here. I'm going to teach you how we make pieces of wood like this, which are square to start off with, and we're going to turn these into cylindrical based pieces of wood. We're going to be using tools like this on the centre blade. I'm going to take you through the safety checks we do to start with. I'm going to look at the machine itself, we'll look at the tools and why you use them, and then we'll have a look at doing some skills together. So we're going to turn this piece of square wood into a piece of round wood. We're going to hold this piece of wood between the driving fork and the revolving centre here. As the piece of wood spins around, like so, the tool will be held on the tool rest, and as it spins, the tool will take off pieces of wood. Because our wood is square at the moment, you can see if I rotate that, you get corners flying around. That can be quite dangerous, so we're going to prepare our blank first to make it a bit safer. As you get more advanced, you can turn from square, but not just yet because we're just learning. So now I've got my wood blank that I showed you how I prepared that a few minutes ago, or in the video, it'll actually be just a second ago. I'm now going to show you how you mount this onto the machine. As I'm doing that, I'll explain what the machine parts are and how you prepare this in a safe way for turning. I'll take you through the machine from left to right and point out the different features as we go. So on the left here, you can see a motor. The motor is attached to the headstock. The headstock also has the driving fork mounted into it here. Inside this motor are a set of pulley wheels. The motor spins at a constant speed. We adjust the pulley wheels depending on the speed we want the machine to go. This big long flat piece here, this is called the bed. This here is the tool rest. The tool rest is where we rest our tool. When we're using our tools, we must rest them on the tool rest for safety. Here we have the tail post. Inside the tail post, there's a taper where that means we can lock in the revolving centre. We also have something called a dead centre. They both do the same job, but the revolving centre is better because it spins around with bearings to make that happen easier. Therefore, you don't need to lubricate the centre like you would with a dead centre. Dead centre just means that it doesn't revolve like this one. Here we have the tailstock adjustment wheel. We use this to tighten the revolving centre into a piece of wood to hold it in place firmly, and I'll show you how to set that up in a minute. You can just see here, there's also a lock, which means we can lock this in place once it's set up. In fact, you can see the other handles. There's one at the tool rest, there's one where the tool rest post joins into the bed, and there's one under here for the tailstock to lock that in position too. One of the most important things with wood turning is that our piece of wood has to be held firmly in place by the revolving centre between that and the drive fork. We do that by adjusting the machine and then using the locks to lock things in place so it can't move. Now I'm going to show you how we mount the piece of wood onto the machine. We take the cross where we cut the kerf with the little point in the middle that I made with the bradawl. That centre goes right on the middle of the driving fork here. And the kerf, just basically the waste that's been left with the saw, that lines up with the cross on this driving fork. This is a good driving fork because it has 4 bits where it can grab the material. Sometimes it's only 2. So I'm going to slide that in place and make sure it lines up properly. And then I have to slide the tail stock up so the revolving centre comes into the centre of the wood here. Once I've done that, I can lock the tailstock in place using the handle underneath. I'm now going to tighten up the revolving centre by moving it into the piece of wood by using the adjustment wheel on the tailstock. I then check to make sure my piece of wood is firmly held. If I need to adjust further, I can do that. Now another way in which you can attach a piece of wood onto the driving fork is you can give this end a tap with a mallet before you bring the tailstock in. But this feels absolutely firm to me. I did quite a good job with cutting the kerf, so I'm happy with this at the moment. I'm now going to lock this in place so the revolving centre cannot move back the way. So we've just learned how to hold our material firmly in the space between the driving fork and the revolving centre. That's one of the safety checks you can do before starting the machine. The next one is to set the tool rest up properly so it supports the tool properly before we start manufacturing. So let's get on with that. You can see the tool rest is free to move about at the moment. What I want to do is first of all set the height of the tool rest. So I do that by moving this into position, Again, we've got locks here and there's one underneath here. To get the heights properly set, what I do is I take my tool, and I need to get quite low down so I can check this properly. And I want to adjust the height of the tool rest so the tool will contact the material on the centre line along the material. So I'm just adjusting the height now. I now know that when I rotate this piece of material, the tool rest will come into contact halfway up it. So that's along the centre line. That's perfect. Next, what I need to do, I need to make sure that I can spin my piece of wood without it making contact with the tool rest. So let's do that. So I've adjusted it. I've got a small space here. It's too small to get my fingers in, so that's safe. I can't get my fingers stuck now. I'm just going to check it out by rotating my wood, make sure that I can spin around without making contact with the tool rest. If it makes contact with the tool rest, you then need to adjust it again. I'm happy with the position of this, so I'm going to tighten the tool rest post underneath there and just make sure this is tight too. The tool rest is now firmly in place. My wood is now firmly in place. That's 2 safety checks I've done on the machine before I start working. The next safety check I will do will be to check that the machine is working correctly when I use the power. So when I hit the start button, what I'm looking for here is to check that the material is spinning freely, not hitting the tool rest, and making sure the speed is okay for the piece of wood I'm using. If you've got a bigger piece of wood, you might need to slow down the machine. If you've got a smaller piece, you might need to speed it up a bit. These are safety checks. Next safety check I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that my emergency stop works. So that's good. The machine should turn off and shut down and stop spinning within 10 seconds. So that's perfect. When you approach the machine, if it's not working, it's because the emergency stop button is in. So what I need to do is pull that out by twisting it and pulling. This will now turn on again. The normal stop button is just this red one here. If we do need to adjust the speed of the machine, we do that by adjusting the pulleys in here. Now, as pupils, you're not allowed to do this, but you can ask your teacher for some support with this. And what this looks like inside this, here's a key that opens this hatch up. I open this up, and inside you can see here that we've got a pulley. This is a motor here that drives this pulley wheel, and then the band spins the other wheel. The machine will not turn on while this is open because there's a micro switch in here, so we have to make sure that's closed and then secured with the lock on the top. Okay, happy days. Right. The final safety check I'll do is to make sure that I have the extraction in place in the correct position and on. So the extractor on this machine is this here, and this takes away the microscopic dust particles up into that hose there, feeds it along and down into this vacuum on the floor. So when we're turning, we need to make sure that the vacuum is on, and you do that on this machine just by using it. We have this adjusted. What we want to do is we know that our wood's here, our head's going to be up here somewhere, so what I need to make sure is that the dust is getting taken away in between the wood and my face, so I'm not breathing it in. So just adjusting it so it's just above the wood is absolutely fine. Now at all times when I'm turning, I'm going to be wearing my face mask, and that is to prevent me getting an injury on the face if by any unfortunate circumstance any piece of wood comes off when I'm turning and goes towards my face and my eyes. We must always protect our eyes, no matter which machine we're using. Now this is going to be spinning around in this direction. The first tool I'm going to show you how to use is the gouge. Now the gouge is called the gouge because it's got a gouge out the middle like it's been scooped out. So we've got a U shape here, and the way this works is that along the edge of this cut here, that's sharp and that cuts the wood. The way this should be used is that the surface behind that edge should run along the wood, because that's what gives it the nicer finish. This is not a finishing tool though, it's what we call a rough working tool. It's called a gouge, so it's good for your starting cuts when you're just getting the basic shape correct. Now one other little snippet that I've not told you about is that this piece of wood that I'm turning, this piece of mahogany here, I've made this too long for the job I want to do. The actual part I want to make is about this size. However, I need to have the scrap on the end because you can see I've cut into it and it's held in place by the driving fork in the revolving centre. So I need to mark on where that scrap area is. Now I've got little marks on my wood, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to darken that in, and we'll see when it spins round that you should be able to see the lines there. So you see a line here, I can see a line over here. What I'm not happy about right now is the lighting conditions, so I'm just going to adjust this extraction a little bit. So I know not to go past this area and I know not to go past this area. My tool rest is set up between those 2 points, so I'm ready to start cutting now. This first technique is called parallel turning using the gouge. It's called parallel turning because I'm going to be running along the piece of material. So I'm approaching, my tool is always on the tool rest, I'm nice and relaxed, I'm standing square to the machine, and my body moves along with the tool because I don't want to move like this where the tool is moving away from the tool rest as I move. So I've got to move my whole body and feet along to make sure it's all good. So as I say, this is parallel turning because I'm going parallel with the edge of the piece of wood. You can see the material is coming off at the centre of the gouge, and I'm running it so that face at the edge of the tool, just here, is running along the piece of material. What I can do to check if it's round yet, I can put the tool on top, you can hear it bumping. Therefore it's not round, so I'm going to keep going at the moment. Now, you'll remember when I made my blank up that I had a circle marked on the end here. I also have this tool called outside calipers, and what I can do is when I get my diameter taken down a bit, I can try and slide these outside calipers over. The calipers are set to be the same diameter as the end here. It's not down enough yet because my calipers aren't slipping over. So I need to keep stopping and checking to make sure that my diameter along the length is down to the same as here. Now, this is a lovely cylinder which matches the diameter of the circle I marked on the end of my piece of wood when I started doing my blank preparation. Now what I can do is I can take a steel rule. I've got my measurements on a drawing, so I'm going to mark on this piece of wood here now with my pencil to show my dimensions that I want to turn to. So 1 at 0. Now I'm making my mark quite dark on the wood with my pencil. I've got 1 at 100. I've got 1 at 180, and between 180 and 200 I've got a little groove to put in here, and then it finishes at 250. Now what's quite cool, and pupils like this normally, is that you can mark on here with the pencil when the lathe is turning. That would have worked if my pencil marks were dark enough to start with, which they're not, so I'm just going to make them a bit darker. This piece of wood is relatively dark, so it's harder to see the marks standing out. So let's give this another shot. Better. Now the next tool I want to speak to you about is the parting off tool. The parting off tool, you can see is rectangular when you look at it from this angle, but when I spin it around it's got that point. Now the point actually goes into the wood like this, And what happens is it leaves a lovely right angle groove in the piece of wood. This can be used for shaping, but it can also be used for cutting off at the end when I'm finished my piece of work. So it can be used during processes, and it's also used for the last process. Now when I'm making my groove, I'm going to set my outside calipers using my steel rule. I know that the diameter that I'm looking for is 40, so I put one end of the outside calipers at 0 and move the other one to 40. That means that when I'm checking the depth of my groove, I need to take it down until the outside calipers can just slip over and no more. Now you can see that even though I've used my parting tool, like so, that I've had to do some parallel turning by moving the parting tool along the way. So the action of parallel turning doesn't change just because I've changed the tool I'm using. It's still called parallel turning because I'm moving parallel with the material, like so. But you can see the job the parting tool has done by leaving a lovely groove with right angled sides on it. The next job I'll do with this is I know that here is waste and I know that here is waste. So what I'll do is I'm going to part that off, and I'm going to part that off just a little bit because I need to take the diameter of this piece down too, and I'm going to do parallel turning for that. Now at this point here, I've made a little groove because I want to use my gouge tool to remove this material. This has to be reduced in diameter, so I'm going to do some parallel turning with my gouge here. And the reason I made this little groove here is because I've used my parting tool to make that groove, because my gouge being rounded can't get in to the corner there where the groove needs to be a right angle. So I used two tools to help with this, but I'm going to do some more parallel turning here. Now, the next tool I will show you is what we call the scraper tool. The scraper tool looks like this. And what we do is we hold it against the wood with the sharper edge up. And the whole point is that the wood will come round, touch the edge where it will be cut, and then this smooth part here will give a nice finish to the wood as it moves past. So when you're cutting with a scraper, make sure you've set your height so the tool reaches in the middle of the piece of material, height-wise, and make sure that you have the angle set so that the wood touches this smooth piece here. I'm going to use the scraper to smooth off this area, and this area, because I use the gouge to do that, so the gouge doesn't leave a smooth finish where the scraper will. Now the last piece I'm going to show you today in this little video is I'm going to show you how to make a bead. A bead is simply just a rounded off corner, and we need a bead on this design that moves from this edge here down to this flat surface. To make a bead, I've taken here a smaller gouge than the last one. If you look at comparison in size, the reason I've taken a smaller gouge is because the difference in height between here and here is quite small, so I want it to be able to fit. And we're going to make the bead by approaching the piece of wood, and then as we move in slowly, we rotate the tool. So just for a wee bit close up, hopefully the camera can pick this up. We take the tool, okay, and as the machine is turning the wood around, we push against gently, but we rotate the tool like this, 90 degrees. And the action of doing that creates a round surface. Let's have a look. For a small insert at the end of this video, I'm just going to show you what the piece looks like when we're finished. So I'm going to take this off on the bandsaw here and here at this end, and then the rest I'm going to use for the product I'm manufacturing. You can see the lathe is in a bit of a mess now, so I've got a bit of hoovering out to do. We never brush our dust down because it's bad for your breathing. Your lungs don't like it, so make sure you're just using a hoover to vacuum up any of the wood dust. What we have to do to remove the piece of wood from the lathe is we have to just loosen this lock handle here, retract the revolving centre, and then we'll be able to remove the wood from the lathe. And this is what we have here. Okay. Now, another thing you can do before you do this, taking it out, is you can do some finishing, so you can do your sanding and applying a finish on the lathe.